So again to our PTSD resources and where to get help. Last month, in December actually, and January, we had a session on post-traumatic stress and traumatic injury. The big piece of information that I took away from that session was that traumatic stress and the brain injuries happen to our veterans as well as to many people in our civilian population. And what we took away from a lot of things that the presenters had said during that session was that there are many resources out there to help people, and that the folks who are afflicted by these conditions, many times the things that are happening are only known to the individuals themselves. So the stigma is often associated with PTSD and traumatic brain injury that scare the folks who are thinking hiring them or having them as members in their service is not as scary as often is thought about. So some of what we learned in this session, and Shannon will cover a couple other points, but what we learned from that session as well is that there are a lot of online resources, learning tools, websites, and phone apps out there that can help you when you're working with veterans and their families, or help to refer them to places that they can go when they need more information and assistance. So Dr. McCaslin again has offered to give us a little extra time today to help us learn about these resources in this webinar. I think you'll find that these things will make you more comfortable with this population, as well as give you confidence in your ability to help them and provide them with places for them to go. With that, I will give you a few words about Dr. McCaslin herself, and then turn the presentation over to her. Shannon McCaslin is first and foremost the daughter of a U.S. Army vet. She was in the Vietnam War. This gives her both the passion and personal knowledge about this work. She's a clinical psychologist and health science specialist at the National Center for PTSD. She developed a PHA online toolkit for community mental health professionals that I believe you'll learn about today. And a lot of her work recently focuses on improving the understanding of PTS and studying the relationship of PTSD and the quality of life in returning vets. She'll share a lot of this information with you today, and with that, I'd like to welcome Dr. McCaslin to the show.
Thank you so much, Debbie. Good morning, good afternoon to everyone out there. Thank you so much for listening in. Today I'm going to cover a number of resources. I would like to point out that these are resources I chose that, that I've frequently used myself and feel are valuable. That's not to say that there's not a lot of other resources out there on the internet and in the community. And happy after this to answer any questions or to receive any emails that requests for information about other resources or questions about other resources as well. So just throw that out there. As Debbie had mentioned, the last time that we spoke about post-traumatic stress and TBI, we gave some information on rates of PTS in civilian veteran communities and some general information. And I'd just like to quickly highlight a couple of things. Post-traumatic stress, actually, the diagnosis of post-traumatic stress disorder occurs really in a minority of folks. In the civilian population, it's about 8% from a national comorbidity study that was done. That's one general figure, with rates higher in women than in men. And among veterans, particularly those who have served in Iraq and Afghanistan, the rates have varied anywhere from 6% all the way up to 25%. And that varies because of a number of reasons, depending on what sample you're looking at, for example, or a number of other things. It does range, but it is a minority that will actually have the diagnosis of PTSD. That being said, people are exposed to traumatic events commonly. Most people will actually experience a traumatic event in their lifetime. And it's not uncommon to experience symptoms immediately after that event. Most people will. It's really how long that takes to resolve and how severe those symptoms are. And you might see veterans who have some symptoms of post-traumatic stress, but don't necessarily have the diagnosis. And so just to put that out there. Also, the diagnosis of PTSD, often it's not uncommon to have that be comorbid or co-occurring with other mental health conditions, such as depression or substance use, for example. So some of these resources that I'm going to talk about today are also relevant for understanding more about the other things that can go along with post-traumatic stress symptoms, as well as other conditions that can happen following a traumatic event or stressors in our lives. So just really, I'll talk primarily about post-traumatic stress and resources for that, but understand that many of these resources can also be useful for a range of other conditions, both and veteran. So with that said, I'm going to move to the next slide. This is broken up into three general sections. The first about resources. What's out there that that is available to help you learn more about post-traumatic stress, associated conditions, treatments that exist for self-management of these conditions. What's out there? A little bit about military culture. Where can you learn more about that? Because that's also a very important aspect of understanding what somebody is experiencing, and where you can get help and where to refer people that you think could use some help, where to connect them, both locally and as well as some national hotlines. And then I'll briefly touch on what are the recommended treatments for post-traumatic stress, where can you read more about what are the things that we generally consider to be evidence-based psychological treatments for PTSD, and where are some places you learn more about that. Next slide, please. So looking into a military culture, for those of you who are veterans yourselves or know a veteran, have a family member who's a veteran, you may be very familiar with military culture. For those who haven't had any affiliation or contact with a service member or veterans, may have less of an understanding. And culture truly is a culture unto itself. There's only differences in structure and logistics and all the things that go along with being in the military, but there's also these more implicit kind of values and beliefs and that are part of being in the military and part of the identity. And these vary across branches. It's often, even after separation from the military, for many veterans, that time in the military and that their experience is still a very core part of their identity. And so understanding that background about the military and military culture can really help you understand who's in front of you and how that might influence or impact what symptoms they're experiencing or what's going on in their life. So the first resource that's highlighted is the Center for Deployment Psychology. This deployment psychology is part of Defense Centers of Excellence. It works with the American Psychological Association, and they have a mission to train individuals, behavioral health care providers, etc., in working with service members and their family and deployment-related issues. So that would be with post-traumatic stress, by other deployment-related issues. They have a number of trainings that are in person and workshops where they send out professionals who have a deep knowledge of these things. And you can check and see, are there any of these seminars or workshops available where I am. They also have an online course that can give a nice brief background on military culture. It's 100 minutes. There's 2 versions of it, so if you do provide CE credits, but that you would need to pay for, but you can take the course for free if you don't need CE credits. And this is a nice website. You can look around here to see what other trainings might be provided in your area as well. Next, please. A resource for military culture that I'll highlight is the Community Provider Toolkit, and Debbie touched on this a little bit. I've been very involved in working on this toolkit at my time at the National Center for PTSD, and collaboration really with the VA and National Center. It's a VA website. It's actually the provider website on the VA at this point, and it was intended to be a toolkit that put key resources and tools, information on connecting with VA and military into the hands of people working in the community in behavioral health, in primary care, who are seeing veterans in their practice and need information and resources. And there's a number of sections in this toolkit that could be potentially useful, and I'll go over those, more of those as we go along. The first one I'd like to highlight is the Military Experiences and Culture tab that you can see on the front right of the Toolkit homepage. And if you click on that, it takes you, if you go to the next slide, it actually takes you to Understanding the Military Experience page. There's a number of handouts. If you go into this a little bit, it'll talk about the importance of military culture and the different components of that. There's information on deployment and operational experiences, and to give background on what is deployment, how long does deployment potentially last, what does it mean to be deployed, what can happen in that context, that kind of thing. It also gives information on Reserve National Guard, what's different for that versus being on active duty, for example. And the tab for learning more, which includes a list of cultural resources, and will take you, also, for example, take you to the branches of the military. So you can look at the different branches of the military and their web pages and kind of learn a little bit about that. There is a link on this as well to some military culture online trainings that are free through the National Center for PTSD, and you can go and explore a little bit around there and see what's available to learn more about this topic. Next slide, please. So I'm going to move into education and resources for veterans and families. And I'm going to start with the Aboutface Campaign. This is a relatively new campaign that launched last year. And it's really intended to help veterans learn about PTSD, explore treatment options, and understand how to get into treatment. And that's the most important piece of this campaign are veteran stories that have been collected and are here on this site for you to view. These are veterans who have served, and they're telling their stories, true stories about their experiences with post-traumatic stress symptoms, how the course of how that went, and how they sought help, what they did about it, and their suggestions and advice. And so, this is for veterans to be able to go and watch these videos and feel connected to another veteran who might be experiencing a similar symptoms, a similar situation, and learn what they can do to help themselves. At the same time, I think this is a wonderful learning resource for anyone who wants more about what is it like to experience post-traumatic stress, what can you do about it, and to really connect with these stories and these individuals who are sharing. And so I encourage people to go to this to really get a better understanding from the veterans themselves, what this is like to experience. This is actually part of this. So this campaign comes out of the National Center for PTSD. The National Center for PTSD has been around since about 1989, and its mandate is to be a center of excellence for research and education on the prevention, understanding, and treatment of PTSD, and for both civilians and veterans. So on the National Center for PTSD website, you'll find just a goldmine of resources around post-traumatic stress for both civilians and veterans, as well as conditions that are associated with post-traumatic stress, information on treatments, just really virtually a ton of information. So other things, so this is, thank you, Debbie, this is was taught in terms of some of the things that exist on the National Center for PTSD. There's a lot of online patient education, so there's resources for veterans and providers in the community. This includes things like fact sheets, handouts. There's a whole list of courses about different aspects of post-traumatic stress, military culture, different things that you can learn about them by watching a more interactive video versus just reading about it. There's war zone guides about what is it like to return from the war zone, and these guides exist for families and for veterans. Relevant websites. So MultiVet is a VA website where a veteran who's enrolled in the VA can do self-assessments, can manage their health their health appointments and their care, and I believe can secure message their doctors as well, so that's a useful resource. Afterdeployment.org is another very relevant link, and I'll talk more about afterdeployment.org, but there's some unique and interesting things on there as well, and we'll talk about that. And there's resourcedirectory.gov, where you can find a number of different resources for things. Please. Just an example of one of the handouts you could download off the National Center for PTSD. And what's really nice about it is they've laid out what are treatments that we consider to be evidence-based or are often used with post-traumatic stress. Because, as we all know, many people who go in for mental health care or for support don't really know exactly what they're asking for. They want help, but they don't know exactly what it is that they should be receiving in terms of care. So this is one handout or one example of a handout where they talk about what is treatment for PTS and what are PTSD and what are the different different types of treatment, what will it mean for me to do this treatment, what are the components, etc., to really give somebody a deeper understanding before they go in and get care, or even while they're in care, to know what it is that could be helpful for them. And next slide, please. The other thing that's on the National Center for PTSD website that might be useful for folks is a pilots database, which includes over 50,000 citations for articles on traumatic stress. It is being updated. So if you're looking for a specific question about PTSD and its relationship to something, or just in general in a different context, or any question you might have, you can type it in there and see what articles come up. What's the published literature on this? If the article has been authored by a National Center for PTSD author, then those will also be there as PDFs. Please. That was the National Center for PTSD. Another extremely useful website is afterdeployment.org. It also comes out of the Department of Defense, and it's service members really primarily, veterans. And if you look, they have a number on these squares that are on the screen are all different workshops on different topics. And so there is post-traumatic stress in the corner left top, and then there's also mild traumatic brain injury. There's families and relationships, workshops and assessment, many clinics almost for veterans and family members to learn more about these conditions, to go through assessments, different things like that on their own. So useful self-management and self-educational kinds of tools. There's across the top bar, you can see there's different topics, assessments, videos, community resources. The assessments are very useful. There's a number of assessments that people can do to assess where they're at on different dimensions of things, and that clinicians can also use. Behind the home page, if you look up at the top left, there's a Providers tab. If you were to click on that Providers tab, I don't believe I have a slide about that, but if you were to click on the Providers tab, that would take you to a site that would list the practice guidelines along the bottom for different conditions, including post-traumatic stress. And these are the VA DoD guidelines. VA and DoD sat down and came up with clinical practice guidelines for these conditions. And you read about what was considered to be evidence-based, or what were the decisions that came out of that. You can download those off that Provider tab. Within that, there's also a listing of mobile apps that I'll talk about later that are available for download. And so you can look there and just kind of see what are the smartphone or mobile app applications that can be used to self-manage symptoms, or to do some, there's one for deep breathing, relaxation. There's the PTSD Coach, which we'll talk more about. But you can find those in that Provider tab. Next slide, please. This website is maketheconnection.net. This is a VA website. It was developed by VA fairly recently. It's similar to the Aboutface campaign that I mentioned earlier, with the video stories of the veterans with PTSD. Connection is much more broad. It's about all the way from readjustment from combat to having PTSD or having other conditions. There's just a ton of veteran stories and veteran videos, like Aboutface. These are actual veterans who are willing to share their story and record that. Sort this site, you can actually customize it. So a veteran could go in, click, okay, I'm a female veteran, I served in Iraq, and I was exposed to combat. And you can say customize, and the story that's closest to your story will come up. And you listen to that, you can listen to what that person's experiences were, how they got help, and what that was like for them. And what will pop up on the side are a number of resources to direct somebody to where they can go to get help. And so it's a really nice way of connecting veterans to, again, veterans that have had similar experiences and connecting them to these resources. And again, for those who are not veterans, it's also a very nice resource to be able to hear these stories from actual veterans and hear their experiences firsthand. Next slide, please. One Source is another very useful website for service members from branches, service providers, family members, the number of web resources on this site as well. And I guess the main thing is really about the phone line for this one. What I highlight is that there's availability to reach out to somebody 24 hours a day, 365 days a year. And you can go on this website and find that number and find these free counseling services also that are listed there. Next slide, please. The Department Center of Excellence Outreach Center also has just a very rich. It's a very rich source of information and resources on psychological health generally and traumatic brain injury. It connects people to resources, assists service members, veterans, families, navigate the system of care, and responds to information requests about DECO, or the Defense Centers of Excellence. You can see the screenshots on the left where there's a Outreach Center number. The National Suicide Hotline is there. And you can see how you would search for things or sign up for their emails and their resources. Again, some of these things will overlap. Some of these resources have similar information. But I'm trying to highlight some of the main points on each site so you can get a sense of their particular flavor and what you might get when you go to this site. Next one, please. So the PTSD Coach phone app. What's very exciting is that we're in a new age where many people own these smartphones, and we're able to reach people in a way that we haven't been able to in the past. The DoD have collaborated to work on developing applications for smartphones that returning veterans or others with PTSD actually and other veterans could have with them all the time to help manage symptoms, to know where to get help, to connect to people very quickly. This phone app that I would highlight that's come out is the PTSD Coach. This mobile phone application for PTSD. It includes all of these components that you see here: education about PTSD, a self-assessment tool, portable skills. It can be kind of standalone and self-management, or you can use it in a clinic if you're seeing somebody with PTSD. Just a little bit of information about how widely disseminated this phone app actually has been is that it's been, the numbers are about 95,000 have downloaded this phone app to date, and that's in 74 countries. So it's really getting a lot of attention and a lot of use. So next slide, please. What it looks like in terms of the self-assessment screenshots. You go in and take a standardized questionnaire for PTSD symptoms, and you can monitor where you fall on this. And this is actually available for download off iTunes. There's an Android version. It's free to the public, and it's just a great tool that's at your disposal. And you can schedule assessments, and you can look back at your history and see how your symptoms have been the past month, for example, or past couple months. Next slide, please. This is the component on managing symptoms, just one screenshot to give you a flavor again of this. Let's say you're having some symptoms. Ask what's wrong. You click the button. It'll ask how distressed you are, and it'll give you just a tool to use. Say deep breathing, relaxation. They have a whole, just a ton of different tools included in this. And if the tool doesn't seem appropriate for you or you aren't interested in that, you can give it a thumbs down and it shouldn't pop up again. You can skip it and get another suggestion. But the idea is to give people in the moment something that they can use to cope with what's going on for them. Then you can actually re-rate your distress and see if it was helpful to you. If you want to choose another tool, you can do that. Next slide, please. Here's some of the tool examples, actually. So there's the breathing, positive imagery, soothing picture, making a plan, and there's many more than that, but that's some of the things that will come up. Next slide. So there's many more apps that are actually on their way out. Currently available up on the left, the first one on the top left, the PE Coach, that's actually a phone app that's designed to be used in concert with treatment using prolonged exposure therapy. So prolonged exposure therapy is something I'll talk about a little bit later, but it's one of the treatments that we consider to be evidence-based for PTSD. This phone app really helps both the patient and the provider to go through that treatment in a very systematic way. So what you'd see is each session listed, the components of each session. It gives you the opportunity to record the session on the phone app, but it's a very useful therapeutic tool. So if you're doing treatment with somebody, Prolonged Exposure Coach or PE Coach is very useful. Another one that's currently out that you can find in the iTunes store is the next one, the PFA Mobile. That's Psychological First Aid. And that has a lot of psychological first aid skills so that you might use, for example, following disaster or trauma. You can see a ton of other things that are on their way out. What's been completed and is actually in the process of being certified and probably available within a few months is PTSD Family Coach, which is a phone app for the family members, not just the veteran. ACT Coach, ACT being the Acceptance and Commitment Therapy. Mindfulness Coach, State Coach, which is smoking cessation. Mood Coach for depression. Sleep Coach, which is cognitive behavioral therapy for insomnia. It'll be a good adjunct for that treatment. Cognitive Processing Therapy Coach, which is similar to the Prolonged Exposure Coach. Cognitive Processing Therapy is another treatment for PTSD. Traumatic Brain Injury Coach, and problem-solving training moving forward. Those are all completed and are just getting through that certification process. Things just to let you know that are in development and probably due out within the year or 6 months are Parenting Coach for parents, self-assessment, safety planning, and an app for alcohol and PTSD. That's just an example, sort of a list of things that are going to be upcoming that you want to look for. But these are useful things that can be done by a veteran very quickly and can give a lot of information, education, and self-management kinds of tools. Next slide, please. All right. So the Community Provider Toolkit that I mentioned earlier when we were talking about military culture and experiences, this toolkit actually also has many sections on, connecting to VA, or much information on connecting to VA. What you write tab that says mini clinics that actually takes you to some concise sections that provide key resources and tools on a number of different conditions, ranging from PTSD to suicide prevention, for example, information on women veterans specifically, And those are actually still coming out. So if you click on that, you'll see that there are still some grayed out mini clinics that aren't available yet, but those are in process of being developed and will be released. I can give you a lot of the key information and tools for those particular conditions that exist within VA, DoD, and outside. So then, I come back actually to the connecting with VA, but let's continue on to the next slide. Okay, to get help. So if you refer someone for help, if you suspect there's a problem or they talk to you about there being a problem or needing help, how do you get somebody into treatment? The VA actually is really providing cutting-edge care in PTSD. And if you are a VA, I strongly suggest referring somebody to the VA. And you can find your VA program locator by going to this link that's provided here. It's also in the handout that was included with the materials today. Real quickly, there was a question about clarifying the difference between PTSD and post-traumatic stress. Talk about post-traumatic stress. We're usually talking about symptoms of PTSD, but not meeting a diagnosis of PTSD. The reason for that is that post-traumatic stress symptoms can impact somebody's life even if they're not meeting a diagnostic status. That functioning and being able to live your life can also be impacted by a lower level of post-traumatic stress symptoms for many people. And so it's also important to address that and to talk about that, and that it is dimensional. It's not sort of a diagnosis or not. There may be people who are on that dimension of having symptoms. And so many times we've moved away from saying traumatic stress disorder to saying post-traumatic stress to recognize that it is dimensional, that there are people who will experience symptoms but not necessarily meet that diagnostic status. Does your question, Margie?
Yes, it does.
Yes. So thank you. So what's also here is a crisis line. So if somebody calls the crisis line, it's available 24 hours a day. Chats online, they should be able to reach somebody who can refer them to where they should get care. And the reason we call it a crisis line and not a suicide line is that you don't need to be having suicidal ideation to call this number. If you've experienced, if somebody is experiencing a lot of symptoms and wants help and doesn't know where to go for help, this is a perfectly appropriate place to call to talk to someone, to figure out what to next steps, and where to go to get help. Slide, please. The provider toolkit, we've put together a section that really tried to clarify how do you connect to the VA. What's the best way to do that? And so there's a number of sections here about eligibility for VA because not everybody is eligible for VA. And that goes into that. And for those who aren't eligible for VA, there are some other options, and I'm happy to talk to people if they have questions about that. We had a speaker from Givenhour on the January and December webinar, and Givenhour is also a wonderful nonprofit who can see veterans outside of VA and family members and that kind of thing. So there are those resources that also exist. But the question is, can my client receive services through VA? What are the VA services that are available to somebody, and how to communicate with the VA? How do I actually get somebody on the line and in conversation with them about what this individual might need? And so this is covered in this toolkit, and you can read more about that. And I'm happy to answer any other questions that come up around this toolkit since I work on this section. Also a list of resources to support the care provided to veterans. And again, I encourage you to go in and explore this. Top part here, just under the banner, where it talks about VHA, you can click on medical centers or vet centers and where those nearest facilities are to you. The vet center is interesting because their medical record is actually, at this time, not linked into the medical record at your VA hospital. So some veterans feel more comfortable going to that center if, for example, if they're still in the reserves or or are ambivalent about going to the VA. They may be more comfortable going to a vet center. And so exploring those options is also important. Next slide, please. For those veterans who are returning from the current conflicts or wars in Iraq and Afghanistan, the VA has invested in care coordinators throughout the VA system, particularly for this generation of veterans. So go to the OEF, Operation Enduring Freedom, Operation Iraqi Freedom VA website. You can actually find what the benefits are available to these particular veterans and where they might seek help. There's some social media that you can engage in, and if you go to the next slide, you can see a screenshot of this page. There's a point person at each VA, so if you can, you look up here who that person is and give them a call. It should be able to help with the any questions around returning veterans, getting them into care, for example, enrolling in VA, those kinds of things. Slide, please. So to support veterans' needs, the VA has also, in National Center for PTSD, has invested in creating a number of toolkits. And one of those was the Community Provider Toolkit that I've been doing screenshots of throughout. But there are other toolkits also that are available that have come out recently. That can be particularly useful for veterans who are looking for employment and for employers who are looking to hire or engage veterans. The Veterans Toolkit, Employment Toolkit, just recently was released, and it really, it's a really wonderful resource for employers, managers, supervisors, human resource professionals to help them support veterans in the workplace to increase the retention of veterans in the employment setting and to help really facilitate their success in an employment environment. There's material describing military experience and culture again in this, common challenges that veterans experience in readjusting to civilian life, because really if you're coming out of a combat setting or a military setting, it is, it's a cultural transition to be in a civilian setting again. Naturally, the difficulties that might be associated with that. How do you support individuals in that transition? General tips for communicating for managers and supervisors, how to support members in the Reserve and National Guard, because there's some unique things about those groups. And also a specific veteran resource page that has a ton of information for veterans about all the way from resume writing to how to make important career decisions, how to excel in the workplace, that kind of thing. So this is a very unique toolkit, and I think it can be very, very helpful potentially. So I don't have a slide on this toolkit, but this is another one that came out. It's called the Campus Toolkit, and at the top of the handout from the January 30th webinar that I think is still available to you as well, that Campus Toolkit has been developed by the National Center for PTSD and VA to support faculty and staff on the campus and behavioral health providers who work with on campus to make the campus more veteran-friendly, to understand what they might be facing when they come back and step foot on that college campus. It's really part of this vital initiative to serve veterans where they're at. The vital initiative is interesting. In case you're not familiar with that, it's integration into academic leadership, and it's an initiative that was started by VA to provide funds and support to VAs around the country to be able to outreach to veterans on the campus and be able to provide some health care services on campus. That's currently in about over 20 universities or college campuses now in the United States. And so the Campus Toolkit is actually a part of that vital initiative. Next slide, please. So a little bit about available treatments for PTSD. There are some that are considered to be more evidence-based than others. If you go forward, we can do that. So what I'll talk about, the treatments I'll talk about are based on the clinical practice guidelines that were developed by VA and DoD, and there's a link to it. Also by the International Society for Traumatic Stress Studies, which is also a useful site to go to. It's an international organization for professionals, mental health professionals working in the area of traumatic stress. And there's a number of webinars and information on their site as well. So if you go, next slide. So these guidelines, the Department of Defense and VA really strongly recommend the use of evidence-based, trauma-focused interventions. And interventions tend to include components of exposure, which basically means that you're helping somebody face the event that happened to them. And it can be done in various ways, but you're actually not allowing them to avoid that this event happened, but really walking them through that and processing that event. It also can include components of cognitive restructuring, which basically means looking at things from different perspectives, looking at the thoughts that come up around those events and working with those thoughts to make them more balanced or to look at those in different ways. And stress inoculation training, such as some relaxation, stress management. Focused treatments that are primarily used include prolonged exposure, which involves, again, walking somebody through that event repeatedly. Cognitive processing therapy, which is another, it includes a component of exposure, but also spend a lot of time looking at the thoughts that come up around an event. And eye movement desensitization reprocessing, which also contains talking about what happened. Next, please. So more about those treatments. Sorry, I feel like there's a gap here with this slide. But just to say a couple words about learning more about these treatments. If you go on the National Center for PTSD website, you can type the names of those treatments in, and you will get information on those, including patient handouts, provider handouts. There's some courses that go over treatments for PTSD on the National Center for PTSD website. There's video courses you can take for free to learn about them and where you might get training on those. If you go into the Community Provider Toolkit that was listed and go to the PTSD section under the main clinics, there's some resources listed there for learning more about these treatments. But there are treatments that exist for PTSD that can be very, very helpful. And I think that's the message that is important to take away, is that if we can get people into care, that there are things that can be very, very helpful for them. So I'll wrap on that. If I'm happy to answer any questions. You can also email me later. My email is up on the slide. I'm happy to try to answer anything that you might have in your mind. Thanks for listening. I really appreciate it.
And this is Debbie. One of the questions I had thought about during this session was most of these things we've been talking about are sources for folks with post-traumatic stress that are veterans, but are a lot of the resources also appropriate for civilians with post-traumatic stress as well?
Absolutely. The diagnosis of PTSD is the same diagnosis. The difference is the experiences and how it might be manifested based on those experiences. But the National Center for PTSD, your mandate also includes civilians. So if you go into the National Center for PTSD and look for a topic on civilians and PTSD, there should be plenty there. But many of the resources overlap. What I would say is, the things that are most unique are really about where you can seek care and the military culture piece of that. Understanding sort of the deployment experiences and the unique experiences that veterans might have that can influence both help-seeking behavior as well as kind of how treatment might be delivered. But there absolutely is a lot of overlap in the diagnosis and the treatments that are available. The treatments I described are still also evidence-based for civilians, and the majority of them actually were developed in civilian populations and then adapted for military. So, I think a lot of these things can be very helpful. I think the PTSD coach, absolutely, they talk about veterans, but if you're a civilian and have PTSD, you could find any of those things very helpful as well, and you could find the PTSD coach app very helpful. Does that answer your question?
Yes, it did. Thank you very much, Shannon. We're going to have Margie do a quick little wrap-up in just a few minutes, but I thought since we had a smaller audience than usual, I don't and see anybody in our audience had any question for Dr. McCaslin. All righty. We don't have questions starting. I will go ahead. Margie, did you want to give us a quick wrap-up?
Sure. In fact, before I do that, I wanted to just ask the folks who are on the phone, I want to point out that underneath the list of participants, there are a couple of icons, and one is a raised hand. And if you are a clinician, a service provider for folks with traumatic stress and TBI, or a psychiatrist, would you please just raise your hand? I'm just curious as to whether we have any folks on the line who are in that area themselves. Okay, I'm not seeing one. If you're still struggling to figure out what to click, keep going. And then my next question is to the folks on the line. How might you or could you use the info you gained today in your work or even in your non-work lives? How might you apply this to what you do? Or can you think of a situation right now, or have you had an experience with someone that you know? And would you just please type your response, either type it in the chat box or just raise your hand and we'll open the line for you. So again, the question was, how might you apply any of the information you heard today to your work, service, or your non-work life?
Somebody mentioned they refer people to the local vet center. That's fantastic. Great.
Thank you. Anything else? Okay. Great. Thank you.
Let's see more.
That's great.
The callers on the phone, one participant said, I've sent the information to all supervisors, vets, and non-vets. We also work with the local DVA. Another said we have AmeriCorps members who are both veterans. And we're getting a lot of comments now. And they're veterans. Many want to learn more, work with those with PTSD and TBI. Another said, I work with a military family assistance center and use these resources that Shannon talked about all of the time. The afterdeployment.org one is especially great.
Right. And I love that there's a personal, if you personally use some of these and found them helpful, I think that's great to mention that. Thank you.
Another said they'll provide future trainings in this area. Another said run a volunteer center that will be a host site for the Community Blueprint Veteran Leader Corps. Excellent info to help me plan member training and resources for Blueprint Christian member agencies. And going to be listing all of this content on our new resources wiki. That's a good as well.
I have a question.
Foster grandparent volunteers work with children of military families, particularly with children of parents who are deployed. We provide training models to our volunteers specific to the population. And one wrote, I work for an agency called Still Serve Veterans, and that's exactly what we do every day.
Thanks, Anna, for your work. Gosh. So I'd like to be reading those for those online, but I wanted the call-in users to know what was
going on as well. And last one wrote, one of our programs is through State Veteran Affairs and knows many of these resources. Many others do not and would like to know where we go in their particular area.
Thanks, everybody, for sharing your experiences and your background with this.
While people are still typing in some of their comments, one question I want to put out there, and I don't have an answer for it. This is not a trick question. This is an honest dialogue about the training piece. What's sense, and you folks who are in the field with programs that have teams of veterans and non-veterans, is it something that, do you train the entire team on the after deployment issues? Do you create a committee with, or ask the vets to plan training, or if they find what they want to train their colleagues in? Can you guys talk a little bit about that? How you handle this in your day-to-day training, or if you do? And if you have any ideas for this, please lead in, or Debbie.
Well, I'd like to, I saw, to thank Anna for all the work she does, Anna Morgan, who's speaking up here, but she brings up being veterans, and I think that, just to throw this out, I do think there is something, really powerful about veterans working in these areas and reaching out to other veterans. I think there is a certain connection there that is just really unique and powerful.
Mm-hmm. Stephanie, I see you said that you train all vets and non-vets and used mixed groups to aid in transition. I would think there might be a difference between training in a team of vets and non-vets that's with vets, that's your service, or that's doing other work. Would you say that's a correct assumption? And not trick questions, I'm information gathering. Thanks. Okay. Good, thanks. Well, let's see if I can sum up some of the key things I heard. And Shannon, please leap in there, because this is when I want to make sure that I'm understanding correctly, because I'm in learning mode as well. So what I'm taking away from this, again, the idea that most people, military and civilian, who experience a severe trauma do have a stress reaction or a post-traumatic stress, and it's the severity and the duration of that and how it impacts their daily life that might move it into a PTSD category, to an actual diagnosis. But whether it's diagnosed or not, the symptoms can still be present. Is that correct?
That's largely correct. I think, the only thing I would say, so you wouldn't diagnose or say post-traumatic stress until those symptoms have been around for a while. So we generally say, reactions at the time of an event. It's not unusual that some of these reactions or symptoms at the time of an event are impacted by the event, which is certainly, it would be unusual if you weren't impacted by a life-threatening event.
It's normal
right.
reaction.
And we talk about acute stress reactions at that. But certainly, you don't have to have a diagnosis of PTSD to be experiencing some symptoms of PTSD. Some, recover fully. So there's really a range. I mean, it's really, it's dimensional. Yeah.
Thank you. It's also, it sounds like the statistics on the percentage of veterans who actually are diagnosed with or experience post-traumatic stress disorder, they from, it sounded like a low of 6% to a high of 25%. It depended upon the population that was studied and perhaps the conflict they were in. And
measures that are used in the absolutely. So people will say, some studies quoted about 15% as a general number. But so you might go with that. One thing I would also throw out there is that, surviving intense events, whether it's combat or motor vehicle accident or rape or whatever it is, can also lead to resilience, can also lead to traumatic growth, which is something I didn't say very much about. But, certainly people can take away different meanings from things and emerge in a way stronger or more resilient. So just to throw that out there too as something else to consider.
That's really important. I'm glad you said that. And it sounds the other thing to keep in mind is that it's really all about the person. Vets are people first, but though vets are people, they also are part of the military culture, and there really is a military culture. And to understand what someone's going through, you need to understand the language and the experiences they've had. The sources are plentiful, and I think as there's increased awareness, more resources are being created. So it's important to be discerning about the resources to which you refer folks or that you use yourself. I can say not because we're in the government, but because we know this. The government resources, the VA resources, are vetted and evidence-based practices. So if you're looking at different websites, you want to look for the .gov or go to the About website or look for the logo. I noticed on some of the .net sites you had in the right-hand corner that it was created by the National Center for PTSD. So look for some of those brandings because you want to be sure that you're referring people are using your website that is reliable. Because we know that like anything, cancer or just about any kind of situation, websites will crop up because that's what we do. We create resources for each other. And then probably the best advice is to start with your VA, and if the VA is not in your area, some of these websites. And then finally, the advice and information you heard today really was based on the needs of clinicians, and some of it was based on what we need in national service as project directors and volunteers. So is there anything, Shannon, you would add to sum that up?
That was very nice. Thank you for summarizing. And thank you so much for inviting me. I'm happy to provide any guidance or answer any questions at any point. If you're always welcome to email me. But thank you so much for listening, and thanks for all the work you all do every day.
Thank you. Debbie, do you think we could send people the chat? At the end? Good. Okay. Thank you so much.
The chat will be sent out and posted on the Veterans and Military Families Knowledge Network as well.
Great. I think, Debbie, this is where you do your infomercial.
Yes. The recording will be transcribed and closed captioning to it, and will be up on the Veterans and Military Families Knowledge Network very soon. And we are in the process right now of doing another session sort of along debunking the myths about hiring wounded warriors for our February 27th webinar, and we'll be getting that information out to folks soon. So we hope you join us for that webinar as well. And that, if there aren't any more questions or comments, we can close the session for the day.
Thank you much.
Thank you very much, and thank you, Margie.
Thank you, and thanks everyone for being on the call. Bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.